الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد. We started this session after the month of Ramadan. This is the fifth gathering that we have on the topic of Ijtihad, Taqleed, Marjaiyyat in a more advanced level. And although I was not planning this issue to be prolonged that much, but we are in the fifth gathering and we are still dealing with the first topic of Ijtihad. I intend to end that, and inshallah from next week we will go into the issue of Taqleed. Didn't want to make it very technical, but the purpose was to just elevate your level of understanding. Some of the follow-up questions that we had from last week, we'll start with that. We looked at the process that when we talk about Ijtihad, the mujtahid, before even they do Ijtihad, they have to come up with a system of how to derive the laws from the sources. And that is the meaning of Ijtihad. So first of all, they have to identify what are the sources where a person will go to seek Sharia laws. And we looked at the issue that Quran and the Sunnah of the Ma'asumeen are the two primary sources. Ijma of the early ulama, as we saw earlier, is just a window into the Sunnah of the Ma'asumeen. The consensus of the ulama by itself has no value in the Shia perspective. Aql also is not used as an independent source of law, rather it is used as a tool to understand the Quran and the Sunnah of the Ma'asumeen. So the conclusion of last week was the issue of hadith. The dispute between the usuli ulama and the akhbari ulama about how do we study hadith. One of the questions which came up was the issue of the akhbari ulama believe that the four early books, you have to take all ahadith and there for granted and you have to accept it. Whereas the mujtahideen basically emphasize that no, we have to look at each hadith individually, scrutinize it before we accept it or reject it. The statement I had made was that, for example, in al-Kafi, which is the earliest of the four books of hadith among Shias, out of 14,000 or 16,000 ahadith, 9,000 are classified as za'if, which means weak ahadith. And one of the brothers raised a good question. Actually, he reminded what I was thinking of talking and I forgot about it. That if we have identified 9,000 ahadith in al-Kafi to be da'if, then why do we not just take it out of the book and only, live with the remaining that we consider to be sahih? And this is where we have to realize that unlike the Sunni perspective of hadith, where they believe Sahih Bukhari is the correct book, and they have a term, they say, Asahul Kitab Ba'da Kitab al-Bari As-Sahih al-Bukhari. They say the most authentic book after the book of Allah is the Sahih Bukhari. And so they believe that you have to take everything from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And that's why we actually use that against them whenever we have arguments. We say, because you believe everything is Sahih, this is our argument. In the Shia perspective, we do not believe that there is any book other than Quran which can be considered to be 100% absolutely authentic. No, we look at every hadith in every book individually. And so this question of, why don't we discard the 9,000 hadiths that we consider to be za'if, an attempt was done about 10 years or 15 years ago in Qom by an alim. If you look at Al-Kafi, it's 8 volumes, almost of this size each. And what he did was he went through the whole book. All those hadiths that he thought were, according to his research, were za'if, he took them out, published 3 volumes. and he gave the name Sahih al-Kafi. And what happened? The house of Ilmiya of Qom was in uproar. How can you do this? We don't believe in Sahih al-Kafi like Sahih Bukhari. Maybe these books, these ahadith that you have sorted out from 8 volumes to 3 volumes, you consider them to be Sahih, but maybe another scholar will come and he will consider your, choice of Sahih there to be Da'if. Or what you discarded as Da'if, maybe research will show in the future that maybe it's not Da'if. And so we don't believe in that, and we say we don't name any book as Sahih. So he realized, he got the message, and he is a very good scholar, no doubt about it. He's done many other works. And so the new version of it came out, and I have that one here. The name is Zubdatul Kafi, which means the cream of Al-Kafi. So he basically, selection of Al-Kafi. That's acceptable. You can say this is selection from Al-Kafi, what I consider to be Sahih. But we cannot say there is a book known as Sahih Al-Kafi in the Shi'i, from the Shi'i point of view. The second point I wanted to add and emphasize was the issue of what we discussed, التصامو في أدلة السنن. When it comes to the ahadith which talk about sunnat and makruh issues, our mujtahideen do not use their full force of expertise to scrutinize them. When it's an issue of wajib or haram, yes, they do that. But when it comes to sunnat and makruh, they say even if the hadith is za'if, it's okay. It doesn't say wajib or haram. And a point I wanted to mention is that principle known as at-tasamuh fi adillat as-sunan is not accepted by all ulama or the mujtahideen. People like Al-Khawi and most of his students that I looked into, they don't accept the conclusion of those ahadith which are used to derive this principle of at-tasamuh fi adillat as-sunan. However, there are many others who actually believe in that, including a very prominent alim of the last century, Sheikh Murtaza Ansari, whose views in usul al-fiqh is still the standard. He believes in that, and he made a point in his risala on this issue. He says that although we believe in this concept that when it comes to mustahab and makruh issues, you don't have to use your full expertise to scrutinize the hadith, but this is not for the muqallideen. So somebody cannot say, okay, I know Arabic language, or I have the translation of Kafi, so I'm not talking about what is haram and what is wajib, but other ahadith, I can make the conclusion and say, based on this principle, this is what we should do, or this is what we should not do. He says that is actually only in the hands of somebody who is an expert in the field. The last issue that I want to discuss as far as the method of ijtihad is concerned is that what does a mujtahid do when a question comes to him or an issue comes to him and he looks at the Quran and the hadith and there is no answer about it. It has not been mentioned at all. And so before a mujtahid can even become a mujtahid, when he devised the methodology of ijtihad, he also has to come up with a mechanism of what will I do when I get a question which has not been answered in the Quran or the Sunnah. It's a new phenomenon. And this is where, just want to put this perspective of how do they handle that area of ijtihad, where Quran and the Sunnah of the Ma'sumin are silent. So, if you look at the screen there, what we have said here, and let me test you in some of the words we have used before. Number one, the first approach of a mujtahid, whenever a question comes up, is that he goes to the qat'i or approved dhanni sources. Remember what is qat'? Qat' means yaqeen. So Quran would be the qat'i, yaqini source. Hadith mutawatir, a hadith which has been narrated by multiple reporters. That is also a qat'. It gives you yaqeen. Just to give an idea of the word qat', remember we have 100% knowledge in one corner, 0 knowledge, which is ignorance on the other corner. So from 0, you come to 25. 25, that is known as wahm, imagination, which doesn't have any value. Then you come to 50%, which is doubt. You are saying maybe this is it, this way or that way. Then you come to 75%, and that's dhann. Means you say, I think that this is what it is. But then when you reach to 100%, that is qat' and yaqeen. So a mujtahid first, he will go for the qat'i and approved dhanni sources. So he will go to the Quran first. And after the Quran, he will go to hadith. In hadith, he will look for a mutawatir hadith. We talked about it, what it means. If he doesn't find a mutawatir hadith, he goes to khabar wahid, a single report, not a multiple report of a statement from the Prophet or the Imam, but from a reliable person. Or he goes to the ijma, consensus of the Shia ulama of the early days. Because that indicates that there must have been a hadith there with them, which has not survived during our time. Now, when there is nothing in the Quran or the hadith on that issue, then a mujtahid has to establish what we call procedural rules or practical principles. Al-usul al-amaliyya. This is the method or the principles that I will use when I don't see the solution in the Quran or the hadith. And that's what we are going to look at tonight. Basically, so we are talking about a situation where you don't have yaqeen. Because if it's Quran and the Sunnah, then you have yaqeen. But if it's not Quran and Sunnah, then you are talking about dhann or shak here. And there are 4 principles that the mujtahideen use. And let me just explain first, and then I'll come to examples. If there is a previous status of that issue, which is being discussed, then they use a principle known as asalatul istishab, which means the rule of continuity. If there is no previous status on that issue, then if it pertains to the law itself, they use asaratul bara'a, the rule of exoneration. If it pertains to the application of the law, implementation of the law, then there are 2 other principles used. We'll come to the details. Let us start one by one. Asalatul istishab, the rule of continuity. It means that, the mujtahid says to you that you find yourself in a situation where you have previous yaqeen and the present doubt about the same issue. For example, I did wuzu at home. I'm 100% sure about it. I come here to the masjid. Now I have doubt whether I have maintained the wuzu or not. I have previous yaqeen that yes, I did wuzu. But whether did something happen that would invalidate my wuzu, I'm not sure about it. I have doubt about it. So you're struggling between a previous yaqeen and a present doubt. Asalatul istishab says you have to continue with your previous status. Your yaqeen will prevail over your shak. So asalatul istishab basically is the issue that you act on your previous yaqeen and you ignore your present doubt. This is a principle based on a hadith of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salatu wasalam, when he was asked by a Sahabi about it. Imam gave the ruling and then he mentioned this statement. And this statement becomes the basis of this principle. لا تنقض اليقين أبدا بالشك وإنما تنقضه بيقين آخر. The yaqeen that you had will not be cancelled by a doubt. This yaqeen will only be cancelled by another yaqeen. So I had yaqeen that I had done wuzu at home. And I have yaqeen that something happened which makes the wuzu batil. Then this second yaqeen will override the second one, the first one. But if it is shak against yaqeen, then it is the yaqeen which will prevail. But the interesting issue is the issue of asalatul bara'at, the rule of exoneration, the rule where you are exempted from punishment. This is where an mujtahid looks at an issue and then he sees no opinion in the Sharia sources, the Quran and the Sunnah. In that case, what does a mujtahid do? He say, well, there is no ayat which says this is haram. There is no hadith from a ma'soom which says it is haram, so you are free. You are exonerated from adhab if you do this. You have bara'at dhimma. Allah has given you this ticket. And this is basically based on the Quran and Hadith. Again, these principles and rules that the mujtahideen use when there is no clear guidelines in Quran and Hadith are themselves based on Quran and Hadith. For example, there is an ayat. This is one of the many other ayats. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما آتاها. Allah does not impose on any person a duty except what He has given to that person. So if He has not said it, that this is haram or wajib, He cannot then punish me on that issue, because He didn't give me the clear ruling about it. Or there is another hadith from Imam Jaffari al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, where he is teaching his ashab. These are the principles you have to follow. كل شيء هو لك حلال حتى تعلم أنه حرام بعينه. Everything, you start with the assumption that everything for you is halal until you come to know that it is actually haram. So you have a proof from the Quran or the Sunnah of the Ma'sumin. So this is the basis of asalatul bara'at. Let us look at the example. This is burning on problem. Is smoking tobacco halal or haram? Again, this is not a new masala. This is a masala which came, maybe 2-3 centuries ago. Just making a note for something else. So this question comes up. Is smoking tobacco halal or haram? So what does the mujtahid do? He goes to the Quran, looks at it. There is not a single ayat about it. Because when the Quran was revealed during the days of the Prophet, smoking was not there. At least in not that region. Then he approaches the literature of hadith of the Ma'sumin. And there also, in the span of the imamat of the first imam to Ghaybat al-Sughra, we're talking about 250 years. There's not a single incident where anyone has raised this question to the imam. So there is no hadith about smoking. So what happens there? There is no ayat about it. There is no hadith about it. So what does the, and third point, till about maybe 20 years ago, smoking was not known to be a harmful substance. They consider it to be just, it's a habit. But whether it has that harm that we know now, it wasn't known there. Let's say 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So based on this is where the mujtahid then uses asalatul bara'a. He says there is no ayat in the Quran which says this is haram. There is no hadith from the Ma'sumin which says it's haram. And therefore he gives the fatwa that smoking tobacco is halal and jaiz. Okay? This is how this principle of asalatul bara'at is used. Means about something which has not been mentioned in the Quran or hadith. But then let me put this more, complication here. Then why some of the mujtahideen say it is forbidden? Now, in the last 10 years, there are some mujtahideen who are saying it is haram. How do we do that? It's not that, the previous mujtahideen their research was not complete when it came to hadith or the Quran. No, they didn't find any hadith or ayat of Quran about it. What happened is that modern medical research now says that smoking tobacco seriously harms the human body. shortens the lifespan. And so now this issue of smoking is being put in a different category at all, completely. Previously they said, okay, there is no ayat about it, there is no hadith about it, and it's a harmless substance. So they said it's jaiz. But now they find out that no, there is a harm, and the harm is serious. So what do they do? And this is where you see different kinds of approach by the mujtahideen. A mujtahid who is not convinced of the medical data, he will put that responsibility on his muqallid. People like Ayah Sistani or Ayah Khoui or many others, they say if you are convinced, if your doctor tells you and you are convinced of your doctor's advice on this issue, whether this is really seriously harmful for you, then it's haram for you. But if you are not convinced, then it's not. So they leave the responsibility on the shoulder of the individuals. But a mujtahid who is absolutely convinced by the medical data that this is seriously harmful for people in general, he will actually give a fatwa for his muqallideen that this is haram. And you have example of Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi in Qom at the moment. He had the same fatwa like others, that if you are convinced with the medical data that this is seriously harmful, then it's haram for you. If you are not convinced, you can still smoke. But when he had a meeting with the Medical Association of Iran, they made a presentation to him, showed him all the studies done. His views changed and he said, for my muqallideen, smoking tobacco is haram. Now, how did he do that? Asalatul Bara'at is still there. But that was used when the mujtahid didn't know this is harmful. Now that he knows that this is seriously harmful, he actually uses another principle. He looks at this ayat of Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Do not put yourself by your hands into destruction. It's a general teaching of Islam. So it is not a specific item mentioned in this ayat. It's a general statement. Anything which is the basis of your halakat, which puts you into that situation where you will be destroyed, it is haram. Allah says don't do that. So smoking didn't exist when this ayat of Quran, was revealed. But we look at that principle and we look at this new phenomenon and we say, okay, this ayat would be applied in this case. So this is where you will see, the fatwa sometimes change because the rulings are not there clear in the Quran and the Sunnah, and sometimes the classification of the issue changes. Previously it was a harmless thing, now it is considered to be seriously harmful substance. The only time we know that tobacco was made haram was because of secondary reasons, where it was made haram temporarily by one of the famous mujtahideen, Mirza Shirazi of Samarra. And this is when the Iranian king at that time gave the monopoly to a British tobacco merchant about tobacco production in Iran. Means no Iranian farmer could sell tobacco to anyone but that British company. And that created a lot of, resentment among Iranian business people who were in that field. And in order to, deal with that so-called imperialism there on an economic level, Mirza Shirazi actually first advised the king, but when he didn't listen to this issue, that you have to abolish this monopoly that you're given to this British company, let the market be free, then he issued a fatwa that from today, to smoke, to produce tobacco, to sell tobacco, to buy tobacco is absolutely haram. And a time came, those days were different days from our time, when the king asked his servants, bring my huqqah, what is it? Shisha, what do you call it now? Bring my shisha. He said, Your Majesty, we don't have tobacco. He says, what do you mean you don't have tobacco? He says, because the queen ordered us to gather all the tobacco in the palace and throw it in the garbage. Because she said that the agha said it's haram, I can't have a haram substance in my house. And so, it basically reached to his own house. And only when he changed his opinion on this issue, the fatwa was taken back. But that was because of, what we call hukm thanawi, secondary basis for a hukum, and that is always a temporary hukum. It's not legislation of a Sharia law for all the times and all the places. Two more principles and rules that the mujtahideen have devised. After istishab and the issue of bara'at, there is a principle known as the rule of precaution, asalatul ihtiyat. Many times you see the mujtahideen saying al-ahwat, or ihtiyat wajib is this, or ihtiyat mustahab. This is where it comes to. And this actually applies to a situation of what is known as al-ilm al-ijmali, where you have partial knowledge about the law, not complete. And that's where ihtiyat comes in. For example, and you are told that in these cases you have to try to do both. We know in ghaibat of the imam of the time, on Fridays, midday time, we know for sure that the namaz is wajib on us. So we have this yaqeen that there is one namaz which is wajib at midday on Fridays. But we have doubt whether it is Friday namaz or Zuhr namaz. It's just an example here. And so this is where, if you are not able to get the clear answer from the sources that we have, then you do ihtiyat. And the ihtiyat would be that you do both. And that is why you see some of the Marjaiyyat used to say that even if you do Jummah with the niyat of wajib, still it's ihtiyat that you do zuhr. And that was on the basis of ihtiyat. Opposite of this is something known as asalatul takhir, the rule of choice. And this is similar to ihtiyat, but this is applicable when it is not possible to do both. Like in Zuhr and Jummah, you can do both. But there might be situations where you get into a situation you can't really do both. And that's where, then the rule of choice comes in, that you do, at least you do one or the other. The last issue, and I want to actually conclude with the discussion on ijtihad, is the issue of the problem of contradictions within the sources. Sometimes a mujtahid studies an issue and says, okay, there are ahadith on this issue, many. But one set of ahadith say one thing, the other set of ahadith says completely opposite. What do we do? And this is where a mujtahid has to come up with a system, before even they do the ijtihad, a mechanism of how to resolve the contradiction if I, face that. And if you remember, we discussed one hadith about it. But before that, let me ask you about the terms which we used earlier. We used the term amma. Anybody remember what does it mean? Amma and khassa. Yes. Amma refers to the general Muslims, the Sunni Muslims. Khassa, the specific Muslims, and that is the Shia. So keep this, the terms in your mind. For example, and so the last issue in usul al-fiqh, when mujtahideen devise their method of ijtihad, is this issue of how do I deal with contradictions. So they have to come up with a method of how will I first try to reconcile the differences. Instead of rejecting them, try to bring them, to a middle ground. And if reconciliation is not possible, then how do we use the standards of preference to prefer one set of ahadith against the other. Because then you have to accept one and reject the other. And this is also actually based on the hadith of the Imams. It's not that the Shia ulama have just made the rules by themselves. If you remember a hadith we had from, it was Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salam, where a companion of him was asking him, sometimes we get hadiths from your companions which are contradictory. One is saying one thing, the other is saying something else. What do I do? And Imam started to guide him. See who is more authentic, more reliable, and accept his version, reject the other. And then Imam he says, if both of them are reliable people, then one of the criteria that Imam mentioned there was that go by the famous hadith and ignore the one which is isolated hadith, which is only, for example, mentioned by one person. Finally, he said that what if both hadiths are mashhur, they are famous, both come from reliable narrators, then what do I do? And these were the words, if you remember, where the Imam says, ينظر فما وافق حكمه حكم الكتاب والسنة وخالف العامة. This is where the عامة comes in. فيؤخذ به. See which one is according to the Quran and the Sunnah, and against the Amma, against the Sunni opinion, then you accept that. ويترك ما خالف حكمه حكم الكتاب والسنة ووافق العامة. And discard the one which is opposed to the Quran and the Sunnah, or it is opposed, or it is according to the views of the Sunnis. Because sometimes the Imams, because of the circumstances, maybe they are spies sitting there in the gathering, they might, in a question of a person, might give an answer which is according to the Sunni view. So when you get two different, statements from the Imam, if one is according to the Sunni view and one is against it, then you will take the one which is against and discard the one which is according to the Amma and the Sunni view. To give you an example, and this will be an exercise for you to appreciate, I have an example there, and you have the paper there. We're talking about this issue of submerging the head in the state of fasting. This is a mas'ala. In Tawzul Masail, it's just one line, isn't it? One of the things which makes your fasting batil. It's just one line there, or one ruling. But to reach to that one ruling, this is the process that they had to go through. What I have there is 5 ahadith on this issue. And I've given you this sanad also, just to give you an idea of how things work. The first one, this is from al-Kafi, Kulayni, narrating from Ali ibn Ibrahim, who narrates from his father Ibrahim, who narrates from Hammad, a prominent Sahabi, who narrates from Haris, who narrates from Imam Jaffar al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. So that's the first one, where the Imam says, لا يرتمس الصائم ولا المحرم رأسه في الماء. A person who is sa'im, fasting, or a person who is in ihram should not submerge his head into the water. So it doesn't mean going under the rain or something like that. It means the pool of water, the body of water, you can't submerge your head in it. So this is one hadith, and if you look at the wordings there, it's very clear, la yartamis, which means that this person should not, submerge his head in water. This is a sanad-wise, it is a sahih hadith, and the message of this hadith is very clear. There's no ambiguity there. The second one, and you can make this remark on the paper you have, that the first one is sahih. The second one, again from Al-Kafi, quoting from Ali ibn Ibrahim, from his father, from Ibn Abi Umayr, from Hammad, from Al-Halabi, again a prominent narrator, from Imam Jaffar al-Sadiq alayhi salam again, where he says, الصائم يستنقع في الماء ولا يرتمس رأسه. that a person who is fasting can soak himself in the water. So you can go in the pool of waters, in the swimming pool, soak your body, but should not submerge the head. This is also very clear. It says, وَلَا يَرْتَمِسْ رَأْسُهُ وَلَا يَرْتَمِسْ رَأْسُهُ. So his head should not submerge in the water. This is also a Sahih hadith, and again it's very clear. Then we come to a third hadith. This is from Shaykh Saduq, from his book known as Al-Khisal. Shaykh Saduq is known as Shaykh al-Muhaddiseen, expert on hadith. And this is a very interesting book, and I really appreciate some of the interest that this ulama had. He actually compiled this book according to numbers. Chapter 1 deals with every hadith which talks about one. Chapter 2 deals with hadith which talks about two things. It doesn't mean he has covered everything, but many hadiths. So in chapter 5, he talks about the hadith which talks about 5 things. And there he quotes a hadith which says from the 6th Imam, خَمْسَةُ أَشْيَاء تُفْتَرُ الصَّائِمِ. 5 things invalidates the fasting of a person who is fasting. Al-akl wa-shurb wal-jima wal-irtimas. The ray is missing there. Wal-irtimas fil-ma wal-kidh. So eating, drinking, intimate contact, submerging head into water, and ascribing a lie, towards Allah, Rasul. If you say that in fasting, your fasting becomes batil. Now, this is again a clear hadith, but we have a problem with the sanad of this. Because this is not a za'if. And za'if because there is irsal in it. If you look at the sanad that he has, the narrator and the imam are not from the same generation. So this fellow says, I heard from the imam, but it seems there is a missing link. And so this is more known as mursal, and because of mursal, it becomes za'if and it's not acceptable. But it doesn't harm, you already have 2 sahih hadiths earlier. Number 4, this is a hadith from Shaykh Tusi in his book Istibsar. He quotes from Ibn Abi Umair, from Hamad bin Usman, from Muhammad bin Muslim, a prominent sahabi of the 5th Imam. But he says, سمعت أبا جعفر, I heard the 5th Imam saying, لا يضر الصائم ما صنع إذا اجتنب ثلاث خصال. It doesn't harm the person who is fasting as long as he refrains from 3 things. Number 1, الطعام والشراب, food and drink. Number 2, والنساء, intimate contact. And number 3, والارتماس في الماء. So at least the meaning is clear here that this is which will harm the fasting of a person, submerging the head in the water. And this is also a sahih hadith as far as the sanad is concerned. Then we come to number 5. This is from Shaykh Tusi again, one of the earlier compilers of hadith, from his book At-Tahzib, where he quotes from Sa'ad bin Abdullah, from Imran bin Musa, from Muhammad bin Hussein, from Abdullah bin Jabala, from Ishaq bin Ammar, who quotes the 6th Imam saying, رَجُلٌ صَائِمٌ ارْتَمَسَ فِي الْمَاءِ مُتَعَمِّدًا. A person submerges his head into water intentionally in the state of fasting. أَعَلَيْهَا قَضَاءُ ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمِ. Is there a qaza for him for that day? The answer is لَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ قَضَاء وَلَا يُعَوِّدَنَّ. That there is no qaza on him, but he should not repeat that. Now, think about it. Does this 5th hadith go with the other hadiths? No, it doesn't. That doesn't go with any of the 4. Because all the 4 were saying, you don't submerge. This one is saying, it's okay, there is no qaza, which means the fasting is okay. So now we have a problem here. So we have a hadith which says don't submerge your head in fasting. One says it will harm your fast. Another says number 3, which was uses the word it becomes tuftar, which means it makes the fasting invalid. So those are all saying you can't do this. This one is saying it's okay. It didn't harm his fast, and there is no qadha on him. Now this is where we get into problems. So what about the sanad of this? Now, there are many ulama who say if you look at the names there, the name in the first line, Abdullah, Sa'ad bin Abdullah, and then Imran bin Musa. Many ulama, when they look at that name, they say, well, this name is not that clear. Because there were 2 fellows known by that name, Imran bin Musa al-Khashab, who is an unknown person. And there is another one who is known by Imran bin Musa al-Ash'ari al-Qummi, who is a very reliable person. So since it's not clear who is this person, Imran bin Musa al-Khashab, the unknown fellow, or Imran bin Musa al-Ash'ari al-Qummi, a very well-known person, a reliable person. So from the Rijal, Rijal point of view, this sanad becomes problematic. And therefore many will say, well, this is za'if. And if we can say this is za'if, then our problem is solved. So we discard this one, and we still have 2 or 3 which says you cannot submerge your head in the water. But the problem is people are Ayatollah Khoy, and that's where we believe Ijtihad has to continue. He was an expert of Ilm Rijal. He looked at it, this issue of Imran bin Khashab, and he said, there is no ambiguity about this person. There were no 2 persons by the name of Imran bin Musa al-Khashab and Imran bin Musa al-Ash'ari al-Qummi. He says the problem has come from Sheikh Tusi. When he gave the sanad, he wrote, or somebody who was writing it for him, wrote Imran bin Musa al-Khashab. Because what Ayatollah Khoy did was he went to the source of Sheikh Tusi. Sheikh Tusi has taken that hadith from Kamil al-Ziyarat, which was earlier. In Kamil al-Ziyarat it says, Imran bin Musa anil Khashab. Imran bin Musa quotes from a person by the name of Khashab. Khashab is not the name of Imran bin Musa. So this is where, what we call the attention of Ayatollah Khoy is really, penetrating. That he says this is the problem with the way Sheikh Tusi, wrote the sanad, and then it created this whole issue that Imran bin Musa were 2 persons, one al-Khashab, who is unknown entity, and so he's za'if, and the other, he says, no, it's only 1 person, and this Khashab from whom Imran bin Musa quotes is also a very known person, and he is also reliable. So Ayatollah Khoy basically rescues this hadith and brings it to the level of Sahih. But that puts us into the problem of contradiction. So if the 5th hadith is also authentic, then you have this contradiction there. If we were able to say it's za'if, then it was easy to deal with it. And this is where ijtihad comes in. And so we have 3 sahih hadiths, which says that do not submerge the head in fasting, otherwise your fast becomes batil. One says it is okay, and there is no qadha on it. There's nothing issue of kafara either there. So how do you reconcile? Now that we have said both of them are sahih, now you have to try to reconcile both. And this is where 2 attempts have been made, 2 methods have been used to reconcile. Some ulama in the past who actually have said that to reconcile that is not difficult. What we will say is that the first set of ahadith are valid. The most they are saying is that it's haram in the state of fasting to submerge your head. but it does not affect your fasting. Just like if I say to you, it's haram to do ghibat in fasting. But if you do the ghibat, does it make your rosa batil? So what they are saying, okay, we accept the first set of hadith. It's haram to submerge your head into the water, but it does not make your rosa batil. This is one way of trying to reconcile these two sets of hadith. But, people like Ayatollah Khoui says, no, it doesn't work. If you look at the wordings of the hadith, they are so clear. لا يرتصم رأسه لا يرتم الصائم رأسه في الماء. The wordings of the hadith do not really allow you to explain in that way. The second method, and this is where Ayatollah Sistani has departed from the majority, even from against his teacher here, and goes with this system of trying to reconcile these two sets of hadiths by saying that we'll take the first set of hadiths, but dilute the force of hurmat to the level of karahat. And we'll say what it means is that although the word la has come, but it doesn't mean it's haram. It is makruh to submerge your head into the water in the state of fasting. And the most that it does is that it diminishes the level of your fasting. Doesn't make it batil. Your sawab of the fasting will go down. And that is the minority perspective of trying to reconcile these two sets of hadiths. Now, according to Ayatollah Khoui, this reconciliation is not acceptable. He says, looking at the wordings of the hadiths, you can't do this. There's no possibility of reconciliation here. It is, either permanent marriage or it's talaq. There's nothing in between there. You can't reconcile this. And so he says that we have only two ways of solving this contradiction. Either we say that we have 3 ahadith at least, if not 4, which are sahih, and then there is one sahih which on the other side. So according to the one principle, we'll just take the isolated report and reject it, the 5th one, and go with the ones which are in bigger number. That will be one way of resolving the problem. He says, but if you don't want to do it, and this is his perspective, because he is one of those mujtahideen who says, so people like Ayatollah Burjardi and others used to believe that even if a hadith is za'if, if the early ulama have acted on it, their action, their implementation gives strength to that za'if hadith and will take it. The opposite of that also. They say a hadith might be sahih, but if the early scholars have ignored it, even though sanad-wise it is sahih, we will also ignore it. Ayatollah Khoui doesn't accept that principle. He says, I go with the dalil. If the sanad is sahih, I take it. What did earlier scholars do? I don't really, care about it. And so, although he says this is one way of solving it, but he doesn't really feel comfortable about it. So he says then the other method of solving it, that we go by the method of preference given in the hadith of the Imam. We compare that with the Quran or the views of the Sunnis. Doing that, what he does, he says we compared both sets of hadiths with the Quran. There is nothing in the Quran about submerging the head in the water, so it's neutral. So you look at the Amma. When you look at the Sunni perspective, for them, submerging the head in water in fasting is okay. So he says the 5th hadith is according to the Amma, and so I'll reject this one and go with those hadiths which are opposite with the Amma. And that is how, the majority perspective on this mas'ala is that it is haram to submerge your head into the pool of water in fasting. So this is just one, this was an exercise I wanted to give to you just to see how things are decided by the mujtahideen. It's not just a arbitrary or personal, choice in that way. There is a system and there is a methodology used even when it comes to the issue of how to resolve the contradiction in the ahadith and the sources that we have. We have about 5 minutes. Any questions? Inshallah, next week we'll go into the issue of Taqleed. I don't know what is the, although this hadith is about the fasting and a person who is in the ihram, so they are not allowed to do that. Does it? I don't know what is the kafara. I don't think he has to do the hajj again, but there must be, I'm at the moment, I don't know the answer to what would be the kafara or remedy for it. Yes. Sistani. Okay. Let me repeat the question. The question he's talking about is the issue of moon sighting. He says the difference between Ayatollah Khoy and Ayatollah Sistani. Ayatollah Khoy, or the ulama before him, and many actually even now, don't even take into consideration the issue of scientific data about sighting of the moon. You see, they are all unanimous on one thing. The Ramadan or the month begins with the sighting of the moon, or to be sure that the moon has been sighted. The difference between the mujtahideen have been from early days about the range of one sighting. Majority before Ayatollah Khoy believed that it is regional sighting. And in the past this was not an issue, because if, for example, 100 years ago, if the moon was sighted, let's say in Pakistan, people in Iran wouldn't even know about it. So this was not an issue. Every community just looked at the sighting of their own, city actually. Even if you look at Mecca and Medina, there is no indication which says that when the moon was sighted in Mecca, Medina followed that. Because for them to follow, they would need the information. And even if the fast horse riding person goes from Mecca to Medina, surely it takes more than a day or two for him to reach there. So this was not an issue. Every city just looked at their own. If they saw the moon, they will follow it, otherwise not. Then Ayatollah Khoy comes, although he is not the first one, but there was an isolated opinion which he popularized, and because of his Marjaiyyat was very long time and universal Marjaiyyat, this opinion became widespread and people liked it, that if it's cited in one place, it is sufficient for all areas where they have the same night. And that is basically the issue of the mas'ala is clear that the moon has to be sighted. It is the difference in application of mas'ala where the difference is coming in. For example, Ayatollah Khoy says even a slight common night between two areas would be sufficient. Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani says no, they have to share more than just a slight, common night for it to be applicable. So even within that school of thought about moon sighting, there is difference in how you apply. Now then science comes in. Till about 20 years ago, science didn't have any clue about possibility of sighting of the moon, how the system works, how many hours will it take from the birth of the moon for it to become sightable. These are all new things which are coming up. And Ayatollah Sistani and even Ayatollah Khamenei, actually they are into it in a sense. They are taking the new scientific information about moon sighting and following that as a way of implementing the fatwa of moon sighting. And so it's basically a way of how even human knowledge is basically moving further about the phenomenon of the moon sighting. The issue of Ayatollah Khoei is that he says when the crescent becomes visible in one place, the visibility or sighting of the moon is a phenomenon by itself. It's not linked to any place or region. It happens just like sunrise and sunset. But I don't want to go into the details here. I can forward you an article I have on this issue about this, and I would try to explain it slightly differently, that sighting of the moon is not like sunrise and sunset. Birth of the moon is like sunrise and sunset. You can actually have a precise data of sunrise and sunset for a century from now. You will know exactly. The birth of the moon also, we can have a 1 century's timetable of it. But sighting, when will it be sighted, is not like sunrise and sun. It's more like, I would say, it's not the rising of the sun. It is the sunshine itself. Sunrise can happen, but because of the cloud, you don't always see it. So it's a little bit a tricky issue of the moon sighting. And that's where, so the fatwa and the opinion is clear that yes, the moon has to be sighted. Now that new scientific information is coming in, people like Ayatollah Sistani are giving more credence to it and believing in it. Where others, including Ayatollah Wahid, I know somebody who knows him closely, gone and talked to him about it. He said, I don't want to even consider this. He just rejected offhand. So he doesn't really believe in that at all. So it's a matter of how they are becoming familiar with the scientific method of implementing the Sharia laws. Ayatollah, you see, all other Marjaiyyat, I think everyone other than him, they say that when you go for a Hajj, the date that the Saudi government fixes, you don't have a choice. 9th Zul Hijjah, according to them, that's the day you are in Arafat. You can't arrange, Arafat day in Arafat on a different date. So based on taqiyya, you do it. You don't have a choice. Ayatollah Sistani says, no, it doesn't work. And so he says to his muqallideen that on this issue, he has put it as Ehtiyat. And so you refer to another mujtahid who allows that. Yeah. Okay, inshallah, we'll continue. I don't know whether we have 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but inshallah we'll deal with the issue of Taqleed from next week. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.